Okay.
I wonder what else they are.
Now we can officially start.
I just wonder what I do. They said 24 hours.
Okay, so we'll continue on with our upper limb. But this morning, let's start with a prayer for the ARC visit and for our week and all of that. Gracious Father, we come to you again in awe and wonder of your love for us, how much you care for this little speck of dust in your massive, massive universe. And we pray that you will be with us this week as we study, as we prepare for a test next week, that you will help us to learn all we need to know and to be able to understand it as well. And I pray that you will be with Jody and each of the other faculty as we go through this ARC visit. Please help all things to go well, help us to survive the ordeal well, and just bless and guide this program as it moves forward. In Jesus' name. All right, so
Happy Halloween.
upper limb. So, what is happening to my figures? I didn't used to do this. I don't get it. I don't understand. It's really annoying. Okay, so we were talking about the shoulder joints last time, so now let's layer on the muscles on top of that shoulder joint. So two that we're very familiar with, the trapezius and deltoid. Also the levator scapulae, and then the rhomboid muscles. So those we're all very familiar with. So I won't belabor them, I just want to touch on the innervation of each of those. So, excuse me. Trapezius is innervated by the accessory nerve, which is, what's another name for the accessory nerve? Cranial nerve 11. Sorry, I'm deaf today, guys, so you have to talk louder. I was doing this all during my 9 o'clock class. What did you say? Felt like a grandma. Anyways, so cranial nerve 11. In this figure, I think it's a little misleading, to be honest, because the accessory nerve actually comes out a little bit further out this way and then branches in this direction. The nerve that they have labeled as the accessory nerve is a better morphology for the dorsal scapular nerve. So, I looked it up in a couple of my other anatomy textbooks, and that does seem to be correct. So this would be more dorsal scapular nerve. Okay. The dorsal scapular nerve is one of the main innervators of the rhomboids. Excuse me, and the levator scapulae. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Then we have the axillary nerve, and the axillary nerve will be innervating the deltoid. So for these muscles, I'm not belaboring them because we've already studied them, but do remember to know the origin, insertion, and action as well as innervation. So make sure you know all of those for these muscles. Okay. Next. Okay, so then move to a slightly different region, the posterior scapular region. And with this lecture in particular, there's a lot of overlap between different regions because we've got the shoulder, which is kind of this whole area, and then we kind of subdivide it into the posterior scapular region and then like the axillary region. So there's going to be a lot of overlap. So I'll just highlight the muscles in each region, and then we'll talk a little bit more about each new muscle as it comes along. So we've already talked about the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, and teres minor, there it is, for the muscles of the posterior scapular region. A new one is the teres major. And the teres major, remember, the inferior border of it defines the end of the axillary region, okay? One of the ends of the axillary region. This is the level at which the axillary artery becomes the brachial artery. I'm not even going to go into the veins. We'll just stick with the arteries. okay? Excuse me. And then we have the long head of the triceps brachii coming up into that posterior scapular region. And it inserts, you can't see it, but it inserts on just below the glenoid cavity, so. So just below that socket joint on the lateral part of the scapula. Okay. We'll learn more about the triceps and when we get to the actual arm portion. Okay. We good? Okay, so innervation of those muscles. Excuse me. So we have again an axillary nerve. An axillary nerve is going to partially, one of its jobs is going to innervate the teres minor. We have the suprascapular nerve up here. And that's going to innervate the infraspinatus and supraspinatus. And then we have the inferior subscapular nerve, which they don't really show on this because it's kind of on the other side. But I do want you to know at least its name and the fact that it innervates teres major. So teres major is innervated by the inferior subscapular. And then finally, the radial nerve is the innervation of the triceps. Excuse me. I think your atlas has a good picture of the teres major and the inferior subscapular nerve. So if you want to check it out there, that's probably your best bet. Okay, arterial supply. And in this section, we have, again, the concept of anastomosis happening here. So major arteries are the thyrocervical trunk, the suprascapular artery, and then the subscapular artery. Branch of the subscapular artery is the circumflex scapular artery, and for these, the deep branch of a branch of the thyrocervical trunk, so we'll identify that one, the transverse cervical artery, the suprascapular artery, and the subscapular artery all have branches that anastomose together.
Can you say that again?
Yep. So the thyrocervical trunk gives rise to the transverse cervical artery and the suprascapular artery. Those two arteries plus branches of the subscapular artery all anastomose in this posterior scapular region. The important thing about this is, like with all anastomoses, if you have occlusion of one artery, you get maintenance of blood flow to the region, but this can actually serve the whole upper arm, even if the axillary artery is blocked. So if there's an occlusion of the axillary artery, kind of in this region here, these smaller vessels can take over and still supply the rest of the upper arm with blood through this anastomosis. So it allows for some good collateral flow there. And I just want to point out the anterior and posterior circumflex arteries, and these are going to supply the shoulder joint. Arterial supply makes sense? All right, so that's kind of shoulder, posterior scapular region. Now we'll move into the axilla. And we talked about the borders or the walls of the axilla before. So we just want to revisit that briefly. So here's all of the definitions of the walls. So the inlet here begins at the lateral margin of rib 1 and kind of at the level of the clavicle, and goes down to the floor, which is the skin of the armpit and an opening into the arm. And then we got our medial, lateral, and posterior walls as well. So know the locations of those walls, the major structures of those walls. The other thing I want to point out for this is just the axillary sheath. So like we had for the femoral sheath, we have a band of fascia surrounding the neurovasculature of the axilla. So this is our axillary sheath. And it extends all the way from where the axilla begins, or actually above the axilla, kind of continuous with the neck, all the way down to the cubital fossa. So we have the axillary sheath that whole way. Okay. Any questions? Right. So we have just some images showing how this fits anatomically on the surface of the person, because at least for me it's kind of a vague thing when you have just this skeleton and this green blob. So we can see the axilla here kind of tucked in this region of the upper limb. And then you see the neurovascular bundle running through there. So this just helps me kind of visualize where it is on a real human. So then to talk about the contents of the axillary region. So muscles, a couple we're again very familiar with, the pectoralis major and the deltoid. You don't need to know the different parts of the pectoralis major. I'm not too worried about that. Just know that it's there and its insertion, origin, and actions. And then there's this gap between the clavipectoral triangle, which would be important when we talk about vasculature. So, okay. One of the median wall structures is the serratus anterior. Remember that one? It protracts the scapula, and it's innervated by the long thoracic nerve. And so when we have paralysis of this thoracic nerve, we have inability to protract it, but also contributes to winged scapula. So we also would have some problems with the rhomboids as well, but the serratus anterior contributes to winged scapula. Okay. All right, so lots of muscles in this region. So we have the heads of the biceps brachii, both the short head, which attaches to the coracoid process, and the long head, which travels through the I'm going to see if I can say it today, intertubercular sulcus on the humerus. And just want to point out that there is a syndrome if we sever this tendon of the biceps brachii. What will happen is the tendon will actually retract through this this aperture here that it normally slides through, and will cause bunching of that long head of the biceps. And this is what we call Popeye's syndrome. Okay, so it's going to allow for that muscle to bunch together. Nothing's going to be stretching it out anymore. So you're going to get a bulge on the arm. Over time, it will atrophy because it's no longer being used, so that bulge will go away, unless they decide to surgically repair it. But unless there's a really good reason for repairing it surgically. It seems they just let it be. Okay.
In your notes,
Uh-huh.
under anterior cruciate long head and short head of the triceps brachii and then biceps brachii, it's supposed to be biceps people.
What did I write in there? I don't know.
Under anterior root, your second anterior deep root. You have a triceps.
Oh, right, no, yes, that should be biceps brachii.
That's bicep there, okay.
Yeah. Apparently I was thinking well. Okay, so then, in addition to all these muscles we have running through there, and we do have the long head of the triceps brachii running through this region as well, we have spaces that are important, and so I want to talk about the spaces. So we have the quadrangular space here, which is kind of this funny shaped aperture right here. And this is the aperture through which the axillary nerve and the circumflex humeral artery and vein run through. So we have vasculature and neural fibers running through there. And then the triangular interval, this is where the radial nerve moves posteriorly so that it can run along the back side of the arm. And the profunda brachii artery. Okay, so know these two apertures and what runs through them. Okay. All right, so arteries passing through and supplying the axillary region. So obviously we're well aware of the axillary artery. It has 3 parts that you don't need to know. Probably be aware that it has 3 parts, but other than that, I'm not too concerned about it. And then see, here we have the lower border of the teres major as the dividing point between when the axillary artery is and when it changes into the brachial artery. And then here we have our lateral margin of rib 1, which is the subdivision between the subclavian and axillary arteries. Okay, there are multiple branches off of the axillary artery that supply the region. I have a few that I want you to know. Remember what they were. The subscapular artery here. Did I write down what it does? Yes. So that supplies the posterior scapular region. There's the other one. The lateral thoracic artery, which supplies the breast. And then we have the thoracoacromial artery, which supplies the anterior axillary wall and surrounding regions. So it's a lot of the regions in the front part of the axillary region. Okay, those 3 I would like you to know. The rest are down below the axillary region proper. But I would like you to know. Okay, veins. So again, we have our axillary vein coming up through the region, the main vein. And we have the cephalic vein, which is one of those superficial veins coming from the lateral side of the hand and forearm and dumping into the axillary vein at that clavipectoral triangle. Okay. So that's that aperture where it can dive down in between those muscular layers. Okay. Okay, so this is going to be the fun part, the brachial plexus. So we need to know how it branches as it goes along from spinal nerves down to the terminal nerves that come out of it. So we'll just walk down that pathway. So we can remember we're starting off with the anterior rami of C5 through T1. And these compose what we call the roots of the plexus. So these are not the spinal nerve roots. Remember, those are back inside the vertebral column. These are the anterior rami of those spinal nerves that we call the roots of the plexus. Then we get a bunch of splitting and dividing, and we have a region we call the trunks after the first round of splitting and dividing the fibers. After that, we have another round. We have divisions. And then finally, we have cords, and from the cords, we get the terminal nerves. So this next image kind of gives us a schematic diagram of each of these regions. So you need to know this branching. You need to know each section, the cords, divisions, trunks, roots, etc. I won't have you know all of the little branches coming off. I'll just point out that we have the axillary coming off of this posterior cord. Okay, so then we have branching. When we start off, we have joining of some of the roots together to form our trunks. We have then splitting of those trunks to form anterior and posterior divisions, and then cords giving rise to the musculocutaneous, median, radial, and ulnar nerves. I want to point out that this is typically superior. This is inferior. Okay. It's definitely here, and also there is some upper and lower division in this region as well. And this is important when we start talking about injuries that are due to overstretching the brachial plexus. Okay, so we would call injury to this region upper, injury to the upper region, and from here down would be the lower region. Okay. Now, laid out in this diagram, there doesn't seem much reason for the anterior, posterior, all of that jazz. But if we look at it in relation to the axillary artery, it all becomes clear, because the brachial plexus is basically wrapped around the axillary artery. So here we have our roots here. Excuse me. Goodness. And then we have our trunks from here to here-ish. And we have superior, middle, and inferior. You can see they're kind of laid out. Here's our superior. Here's middle. And here's inferior. Okay. When we switch to the next section, the divisions, so that's from here to about here-ish. You see that there are three right here that run anterior to the axillary nerve, so these are anterior. And then we see kind of hiding in under here are posterior. So, let's see here. The dividing line is going to be out here. So these are our trunks.
Can you use different colors, please?
Yes, ma'am. Let's see. There we go. So trunks will be purple, and I'll just circle those. There we go. And then anterior and posterior divisions. Now our next section is our cords. All right, so we have lateral, posterior, and medial cords. We can kind of cut it off about there-ish. So here's a, there we go. Medial, posterior, and lateral cords there. You can see them labeled on the diagram. And then finally we have our terminal nerves, the musculocutaneous, median, radial, and ulnar coming off of that. Okay. So when we look at the arrangement of the plexus around the axillary artery, then all those names start making sense. Any questions? Is that clear? Anything I need to go over again?
The green is the cords and then the nerves is the yellow.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So your terminal nerves. And then the cords are labeled in that circled region. Okay. We good?
And so you said we don't need to know like all of the little branches of the cords besides just the median and posterior?
Right. So the only one I want you to know besides these major fibers that are running through there is the axillary nerve.
Okay.
That's the only one I want you to know. Okay. All right, any other questions? Nope. Okay, so what happens if we damage these nerves? Like I said, often these damages come from overstretching of the brachial plexus. We've got two basic injuries. We can have injuries to the upper region, so this is upper region. And so that's going to damage predominantly this upper part or the parts here on the upper region, okay? Often the damage is right here at the roots. And often that's because of like overstretching the neck, so landing on the shoulder and overstretching the neck, that kind of a fall. Unfortunately, during childbirth, if they twist the neck or extend the neck too much as they're trying to help the mother out, will cause damage to those upper regions. So predominantly, we're going to have damage to what ends up being like the musculocutaneous nerve and some regions of the excuse me, median nerve. Couldn't remember the one I was talking about. Okay, so that's going to generate a particular phenotype. It's called Erb's Duchenne palsy. Okay, Erb's Duchenne palsy. And it's indicative, the sign that's indicative of it is Wader's tip sign, okay? So if we think about what is the musculocutaneous nerve innervate? Remember? Musculocutaneous? Which compartment of the arm?
Lateral?
Anterior, right? So anterior compartment of the nerve, of the arm is going to be paralyzed, or at least weakened, and that's going to cause the arm to hang, not curved like normal. So my arm's hanging and it's got a little bit of a bend to the elbow, right? That's normal. It would actually cause it to straighten out and hang completely straight because there's no muscle tension in the biceps and other muscles of the anterior compartment to help maintain that tone. And so there's just complete hanging straight. Okay. Some paralysis of the median nerve also causes the arm to pronate, so that the palm is facing backwards, and to contract like this, flex like this. So this is the Wader's tip sign, indicative of Erb's Duchenne palsy, or damage to the upper region of the brachial plexus. Okay? Oh, that hurts.
So is that the damage to the median? I mean the musculocutaneous?
Musculocutaneous and median, yeah. So musculocutaneous is very often involved, and then you can have additionally median
For
nerve
the Erb-
damage.
For Erb Duchenne palsy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Is that what the baby picture showing?
Yes. So here it is in an infant. You can see that kind of curved back posture of the arm. So. Okay, so then we have to jump back here, talk about the other common injury. So that would be damage to this lower region of the brachial plexus. And that would be predominantly ulnar and radial nerve damage, predominantly ulnar nerve. And that's from excessive stretching of the arm relative to the shoulder joint. So falling and catching yourself, excessive stretching in this region here. Also, if they grab the baby's arm to help pull it out of the birth canal. So, damage to the ulnar nerve. Remember what the ulnar nerve innervates in general? Lateral part of the hand, right? So we're going to get claw hand. And this image doesn't show it well because it shows more contraction on the medial part of the hand rather than the lateral part of the hand. I like the other one that's in your book here, where it shows contraction of those lateral fingers as opposed to the medial fingers. So here we go, claw hand. Ulnar nerve damage. Okay, so those are indicative of those brachial plexus injuries. There's others, but I didn't have time to study this out. Okay, any questions? Yeah.
Does that relate to trigger finger at all?
Sorry?
Does that relate to trigger finger at all?
I'm not entirely sure what trigger finger is. Can you?
Yeah, I just had, when I used to be CNA, like a lot of the residents, their fingers would be stuck like this.
Uh-huh.
We called it trigger finger.
Oh, yeah, so that would be also damage to the ulnar nerve, because anything affecting muscle movement in this region is going to be ulnar. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Okay, cool. Well, we'll see you tomorrow.